I still remember the first time I told my family about my little idea, my tiny startup, as they would later call it in a way that made me feel small. I was 24, fresh out of college, full of hope, and honestly more scared than excited. I had been working at a small coffee shop while trying to build my app on the side, staying up late into the night, surviving on instant noodles and cold coffee, thinking about nothing else. When I told my parents, my father chuckled, that low, almost pitying chuckle he always reserved for my big dreams. "You're just dreaming again," he said, shaking his head. "Why not get a proper job, stop wasting time?" My mother didn't say much at first. She just sighed, the kind of sigh that carries worry, doubt, and disappointment all at once. Then came my older sister, the one who had always competed with me since childhood. She laughed outright. "A startup, you, with what money? You can barely keep your phone charged, and now you want to be a boss." Their words stung more than I wanted to admit. I felt my chest tight, a mix of embarrassment and sadness. But still, I didn't cry. I smiled. I smiled and nodded, pretending I understood why they were laughing, pretending that their mockery didn't sting like tiny needles. I walked away that evening carrying my laptop bag and a heart heavier than it had ever been, but deep inside, I promised myself that one day they would see. I didn't want to tell anyone else, not friends, not colleagues. My idea was fragile, still tender, and the last thing I needed was more opinions. I spent months alone, coding in my small bedroom, eating at my desk, talking to myself when it felt like nobody believed me. The nights were long, the apartment was cold, and sometimes I wondered if I was just fooling myself. I imagined giving up the comfort of a steady paycheck, a predictable life, a life where nobody laughed at me. But then, every time I opened my laptop, a little spark of hope reminded me why I started. One afternoon, my father came into my room, glancing at my whiteboard filled with sketches, graphs, and deadlines. He squinted. "Still on this?" he asked. "Why don't you just get a real job?" I looked at him and nodded. "I will when this works. I just need a little time." He shook his head, muttering something about foolishness, and left. And just like that, the house returned to its usual rhythm, my family chatting over dinner, joking about work, my startup never being mentioned again. But the world outside my room felt alive. I made my first prototype, shared it with a few local users, and when they actually said, "This is useful, this is good," I felt a surge of courage I hadn't known existed. I started small, barely any funds, just enough to pay for hosting and basic marketing. Every little milestone felt monumental. My sister's laughter still echoed in my mind sometimes, but I pushed it away, focused on users, not approval. Months turned into a year, and slowly tiny things began to happen. My app started getting attention, not much, but enough to make me think, maybe this could work. And then came the first investor email. I almost didn't open it. My hands shook as I read the message from a mid-level investor who seemed genuinely interested in funding my idea. I felt a mixture of disbelief, fear, and excitement. For the first time, I felt seen outside my family, outside the circle that had made me feel small. And I realized something important. What my family thought didn't define me. Their words had hurt, yes, but their doubt didn't control my future. I kept working, reaching out, pitching, learning to speak with confidence about my idea, even when my own voice trembled. I still remember a night sitting by the window, rain falling softly against the glass, typing out emails to potential investors, thinking about all the times my family had mocked me. I didn't feel anger, not really. I felt a quiet resolve, a determination that only comes from being underestimated. I knew then that if I succeeded, it wouldn't just be for money or fame, it would be a silent, personal vindication. I didn't need to yell, to confront anyone, or to prove anything out loud. The proof would be in the life I was quietly building, step by step, in the shadows while the world slept. And so I kept building. Days blurred into nights, nights into early mornings. I survived rejections, technical failures, and moments when I thought I was too small to make a mark. Each failure became a lesson, each critique a stepping stone. By the end of that first year, my little startup wasn't so tiny anymore. I had a small but dedicated user base, a few modest reviews, and the first real investment meeting on the horizon. I was nervous, yes, but something had changed. I wasn't the girl in the coffee shop anymore. I wasn't the sister who got laughed at for dreaming. I was someone who had built something from nothing, and I knew deep in my heart that this was only the beginning. And I had a secret. I knew that one day, the person who could really change everything for me, the one person whose yes could turn my tiny idea into a giant success, might just appear when I least expected it. That thought alone carried me forward, through the doubt, through the mockery, through the quiet nights when no one believed in me. I didn't need to tell anyone, not yet. I just had to keep going, one step at a time. And somewhere deep inside, I smiled, thinking, one day they will ask for me. The turning point came quietly, almost without warning. I had been working nonstop for months, refining my app, preparing a pitch deck, and talking to investors who mostly nodded politely and then disappeared. I was used to rejection, so when the email arrived from a name I barely recognized, my heart skipped a beat. It was from a well-known billionaire investor, someone whose portfolio included companies I had admired for years. The message was short, but every word felt heavy with possibility. "I've seen your work, I want to meet you." I read it over and over, my hands trembling. I didn't tell anyone at first, not my parents, not my sister, not even my closest friend. I wanted to process it alone. I felt a mixture of disbelief, excitement, and a quiet, almost shy pride. That evening, I sat at my small dining table, staring at my laptop screen, thinking about all the times my family had laughed at me, all the tiny startup jokes, all the sighs and rolling eyes. I remembered my father's words. "Why don't you just get a proper job?" I remembered my sister smirking, "You, a boss." I felt a swell of emotion, but it wasn't anger. It was something quieter, validation that only time, effort, and persistence could bring. I booked the meeting, my stomach tied in knots, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was standing on the edge of something bigger than myself. The day of the meeting, I dressed simply, nothing flashy. I didn't want to look like someone pretending to be more than I was. I arrived at the investor's office, a sleek glass building that towered over the city streets. I remember walking in, heart pounding, palms sweaty, and trying to calm my thoughts. The receptionist smiled politely, and I took a deep breath before being led into the conference room. And then I saw him. He was calm, approachable, with eyes that seemed to measure curiosity and warmth all at once. I introduced myself, trying to keep my voice steady, and as I began to talk about my journey, my startup, my vision, something shifted in the room. He listened, genuinely listened, asking questions not to challenge me, but to understand, to learn, to see the world through my perspective. I found myself speaking freely, telling the story of nights spent coding alone, of instant noodles and cold coffee, of mockery from family and friends who didn't believe in me. I told him about my fears, my small victories, and my stubborn hope. And he nodded, smiled, and finally said words that I had dreamed of hearing, words I never expected. "I want to invest. I want to be part of this journey." I froze for a moment, feeling the weight of everything, the struggles, the doubt, the years of being underestimated, all lifting in that one instant. I didn't celebrate loudly. I didn't call anyone. I just sat back in my chair, letting it sink in, my chest full of quiet triumph. A few days later, as the investment was finalized, I received messages from other small investors who wanted to join in, and my tiny app began to grow in ways I had only imagined. And then one afternoon, I was at home, working on some new updates when my mother called. "I saw something today," she said, her voice hesitant. "Someone big mentioned your company, on TV." My father was behind her, looking unusually quiet. "Is it true?" he asked. My heart raced, but I answered calmly, "Yes, it's true." I could hear the surprise in their voices, the disbelief, the sudden respect that had been missing for so long. I didn't gloat. I didn't mock them back. I just let it be, letting the reality speak for itself. A week later, my sister stopped by, her laughter replaced by something softer, almost awkward. I saw your name online," she said, fiddling with her phone. "I didn't think, well, you actually did it." I nodded, smiling gently. "I just worked quietly," I said. "That's all." For the first time, they looked at me differently, not as the dreamer, not as the failure, not as the joke, but as someone who had quietly, patiently proven herself. And all the years of mockery, all the tiny insults, they faded into memory. I had wanted success for myself, not revenge, yet in a way, it felt like life itself had quietly balanced the scales. I learned something profound in that moment. You don't need to yell or fight to prove your worth. Sometimes, the calm, quiet persistence of your actions speaks louder than words ever could. And the most powerful kind of respect is not demanded. It's earned in silence, through effort, through resilience, through being true to yourself even when nobody believes you. That night, as I sat in my small apartment, the city lights glowing faintly outside the window, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. My family, my naysayers, my critics, they would always have their opinions, their doubts. But I had found something stronger. Belief in myself, the knowledge that I could rise, quietly, without anyone's approval, and reach places they never thought I could. And deep inside, I knew this was only the beginning. My tiny startup had grown, yes, but even more than that, I had grown. I had learned patience, resilience, and the quiet strength that comes from being underestimated. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I smiled, thinking that one day maybe they would ask for me, not because they finally believed, but because the world had already proven it for me. After the investor meeting, everything began to change, but quietly, almost imperceptibly at first. My tiny startup was no longer so tiny. Users were multiplying, press articles began to appear, and emails from potential partners filled my inbox. I still worked from my small apartment, my desk cluttered with papers, laptops, and empty coffee cups, but the world outside had begun to notice me. And slowly, so did my family. It started with small hints. My mother glancing at my app on her phone, my father muttering about a news article he'd seen. My sister, who once mocked me relentlessly, began to ask questions, hesitantly at first, as if testing the waters. "So, how does it really work?" she asked one evening, sitting awkwardly on the couch. I explained calmly, showing her some of the progress we had made, the new features, the user growth. She nodded, eyes wide, clearly impressed, though she didn't say it outright. The funny thing was, I didn't feel pride in front of them, not exactly. I felt a quiet, steady joy that comes from knowing that your work, your patience, and your belief in yourself are finally visible, even to those who doubted you. Then came the first public recognition. A local tech magazine featured my startup as a rising star, and suddenly I wasn't invisible anymore. I didn't post it on social media. I didn't make a big announcement. I just let the article speak for itself. But that morning, my father picked up the paper, read the headline, and then turned to me with something I hadn't seen before: astonishment. I didn't know this," he said quietly. My mother simply nodded, a small smile on her lips, her eyes shining. My sister, however, could not hide her surprise. For the first time, she looked at me not as her little sister who had wasted time, but as someone who had quietly built something real, something meaningful. It was a strange, almost surreal feeling. I remembered the nights of mockery, the laughter, the sighs, the words that had pierced deeper than I had let anyone know. And now there was silence. The silence of realization. The silence of understanding. It wasn't instant respect and it wasn't applause, it was acknowledgement, the kind of quiet acknowledgement that comes only after someone has worked, suffered, and persisted in ways others could not see. Months passed and the startup grew even faster. I hired my first employees, secured additional funding, and started traveling to meet potential partners. And yet I kept the same habits, working long nights, staying humble, remembering where I came from. One day, a package arrived at my apartment. Inside was a formal letter from the billionaire investor I had met months ago, inviting me to a private dinner at his residence. I almost didn't believe it. This was someone whose name was known in every corner of the industry, someone whose yes could change everything overnight. I arrived at his mansion, nervous yet composed. The dinner was quiet, intimate, and I spoke openly about my journey, my vision, my dreams, and my fears. And then he leaned back in his chair and said something that left me stunned. "I don't invest in ideas, I invest in people. And you've shown patience, resilience, and intelligence. You've earned this opportunity." I felt my chest tight, my eyes prick with tears, but I blinked them away, speaking with calm gratitude. It was validation on a level I had never imagined, not for my product alone, but for me as a person, the quiet, underestimated girl who had refused to give up. And as I returned home that evening, I realized something profound. My family, my critics, my naysayers, they had their opinions, their doubts, their judgments. But I had grown in ways they could never measure. And then came the moment I had not expected. My father called me one evening, voice trembling slightly. We saw your interview," he said. "The one on the business channel. Everyone is talking about you, about your company." My mother was in the background, quietly saying, "We're proud." And my sister, her voice softer than ever, asked, How did you do it?" I smiled gently. I didn't need to boast. I didn't need to explain. I simply said, I believed in the work and I believed in myself. For the first time, they understood that their laughter, their mockery, their doubts had never stopped me. In fact, in a strange way, they had made me stronger, more determined. And yet, the most extraordinary part of this journey was still ahead. The billionaire investor invited me to a major industry summit, where the who's who of the business world would be present. I walked in, feeling nervous but composed, and as I presented my vision, people listened. Not just politely, but attentively, with genuine interest. And after the presentation, one man approached me, another investor, one with even greater resources than the first, and said quietly, "I want you on my team. I want to invest in your company. Can we discuss terms?" I froze, realizing that the very people who had once dismissed me, mocked my tiny startup, and called me foolish, would soon be watching as my work transformed into something far larger than anyone had imagined. I didn't feel revenge, not exactly. I felt a quiet, calm satisfaction, the kind that comes from being true to yourself, persevering through doubt, and letting your work speak louder than anyone's words. And that night, sitting alone in my apartment, I reflected on the journey, from laughter and mockery to respect and opportunity. I thought about the years of late nights, the tears I hadn't let anyone see, the moments of fear, the tiny victories no one had witnessed. I realized that success isn't about proving others wrong. It's about proving to yourself that you are capable, that your dreams are valid, and that patience, resilience, and quiet determination are more powerful than words or mockery ever could be. And somewhere deep inside, I smiled, thinking, one day, even the people who laughed will come knocking. But by then, it won't matter what they think, because I will already know my worth. Culmination of everything came quietly, almost like the gentle closing of a book. By now, my startup was no longer tiny. It had grown beyond what I had imagined, attracting users, partners, and investors from around the world. The same people who had once laughed at me, the family who called my idea foolish, my sister who mocked my ambition, my father who doubted every choice I made, were now watching as my life shifted in ways they had never expected. And yet, I didn't rush to show them. I didn't announce my success loudly. I let it unfold naturally with calm patience. One evening, the billionaire investor who had first believed in me invited me to a private dinner, and this time it was more personal. He said, "You've done more than build a company. You've built resilience, vision, and integrity. That is rare." I nodded, feeling the warmth of validation, but also a quiet sense of humility. That night, as I walked home through the softly lit streets, I thought about all those years of mockery, doubt, and loneliness. And then, unexpectedly, my phone rang. It was my father. His voice trembled slightly, a sound I hadn't heard in years. We saw your latest announcement. Your company, your funding, it's incredible. We are proud of you." My mother's voice was soft in the background. "We are sorry for doubting you all these years." My sister spoke last, almost hesitantly. I. "I never thought I'd see this day. You've shown everyone what determination looks like. I'm sorry for laughing at you." I listened quietly, and for the first time, I didn't feel the need to defend myself or explain my years of struggle. Their words, delayed though they were, felt like gentle rain on a parched heart. I realized that true recognition from family or from the world is not about timing. It's about honesty, humility, and witnessing someone's growth over time. A few months later, I attended an industry summit, and as I walked the stage to speak, I saw familiar faces in the audience, journalists, investors, and even some former skeptics. And then, to my astonishment, I spotted my father, mother, and sister in the back row. They were not there for show, not for applause. They were there to quietly witness what persistence and belief in oneself could accomplish. I spoke about my journey, the late nights, the failures, the moments of doubt, the tiny victories, and the lessons I had learned along the way. I didn't speak with anger or pride. I spoke with honesty, calm reflection, and gratitude. And when I finished, the applause was heartfelt, not just for the company, but for the story, the journey, the quiet determination that had carried me through years of underestimation. After the summit, my family approached me. There were no dramatic apologies, no forced smiles, just quiet, sincere acknowledgement. My father said, "You were right all along, we were wrong to doubt you." My sister hugged me, whispering, "I'm proud of you." And my mother's eyes shimmered with tears as she held my hand, saying softly, "We finally see the strength you carried in silence." It was humbling, more emotional than I could have imagined. And in that moment, I understood something powerful. The true victory was not in proving them wrong or in showing off my success. It was in surviving the laughter, the doubt, and the mockery, and emerging with dignity, humility, and self-respect intact. That quiet, steady growth, the resilience I had cultivated, was the ultimate revenge, not in cruelty, but in achievement, in living a life that spoke louder than words ever could. And the twist that life offered was even sweeter than I could have planned. The same billionaire investor who had first believed in me now invited me to join a global advisory board, giving me a platform to inspire others who, like me, had been underestimated, doubted, or laughed at. Standing there, I realized that the very people who once mocked my tiny startup were now witnesses to the real impact of believing in oneself. And I smiled quietly, knowing that I had achieved not just success, but respect, and even more importantly, peace. Because in the end, it was never about revenge, or proving anyone wrong, or seeking applause. It was about staying true to my vision, working patiently, and trusting that effort, humility, and integrity always find their way to recognition. My story became a gentle reminder to myself and to others. Never underestimate what quiet persistence can accomplish. Never measure your worth by others, laughter, or doubt. And remember that sometimes the best vindication is simply living your life fully, calmly, and with belief in yourself. And as I sat that night in my apartment, the city lights shimmering through the window, I whispered to myself, I did it. Not for them, not even for anyone else, but for me. And for the first time, I felt complete, calm, and quietly triumphant, knowing that my journey, my struggles, and my tiny, stubborn dreams had finally grown into something far bigger than anyone, including myself, could have imagined.